Welcome, dear listener, to another tale from the depths of history. Before we begin our journey to the ancient capital of Hattusa, I hope your day has treated you kindly. What time finds you as you read this story? Are you perhaps watching the sunrise from somewhere across the vast world, or settling in as evening shadows lengthen? Wherever you are, whether in bustling cities or quiet countryside, know that you're about to step into a world over 3,000 years past, where gods walked among mortals and oaths could shake the very foundations of empires. If you find yourself drawn to these whispered tales from ages long forgotten, consider subscribing to Whispered Ages. There are countless stories waiting in the shadows of history, and I would be honoured to share them with you. Now let us journey back to 1270 BCE to the great city of Hattusa. The first lightning strike came at dawn, splitting the morning sky above Hattusa like the crack of Tahunz's divine whip. It struck the highest tower of the royal palace, sending stone fragments cascading into the courtyard where the morning bread was being distributed to the poor. The second bolt followed before the thunder of the first had finished echoing through the valley, this one hitting the sacred grove where the eagles of the storm god made their nests. Tukulti was bent over his forge when the third strike shook the very foundations of the lower city. The young blacksmith's hammer froze mid-swing as he watched the sparks from his anvil dance in patterns that defied nature, spiralling upward like tiny spirits ascending to the heavens. The iron he'd been working, a simple blade meant for a farmer's sickle, glowed with an inner light that had nothing to do with the heat of his forge. "By the breath of Tahunz," whispered Hosea, the master smith, as he watched the metal cool to a lustrous finish that seemed to drink in the morning light. "Boy, what have you done?" Tukulti set down his hammer with trembling hands. At 17 he had been working the forges for 6 years, ever since his father died in the copper mines. He knew iron as intimately as he knew his own heartbeat, understood its moods and temperaments, its willingness to bend and its stubborn resistance. But this was something else entirely. "I did nothing different, master," he said, though even as the words left his lips he knew they weren't entirely true. For the past 3 nights his dreams had been filled with voices speaking in languages he didn't recognize, whispering secrets of fire and metal, of blood and binding. Upon waking his hands would be stained with soot, though he hadn't touched the forge since sunset. Hosea lifted the blade and tested its edge against a piece of leather. The metal sliced through as easily as if cutting air. "This is God-touched iron, boy. No mortal hand alone could have wrought such a thing." He set the blade aside carefully as if it might suddenly burst into flames. "We must inform the priests. They'll want to examine this, determine what the omens mean." But before either could move, a commotion arose from the street outside. Voices called out in alarm, and through the open door of the smithy came a sight that made both men step back in wonder and fear. The sacred eagles of Tahunz, 12 magnificent birds that had nested in the palace groves for generations, were taking flight all at once, their wings darkening the sky as they wheeled in a great spiral above the city. "They're leaving," breathed Hosea. "The eagles are abandoning Hattusa." As if summoned by his words, a young temple servant burst through the door, his face pale with exertion and terror. "Master Smith, the Queen Puduhepa requests your presence immediately. Both of you. She has had a vision." Tukulti felt his stomach drop like a stone into deep water. Queen Puduhepa was legendary throughout the empire for her divine sight, her ability to commune with the gods and interpret their will. If she had called for them after the morning's strange events, it could only mean one thing. The gods were speaking, and their message was not one of peace. The journey through the upper city to the palace took them past scenes of growing unrest. Citizens gathered in small groups, pointing at the sky where the eagles had vanished, whispering about the lightning strikes and the way the very air seemed to shimmer with unnatural energy. Temple priests hurried through the streets with grim expressions, their usual ceremonial pace abandoned for urgent haste. At the palace gates, guards in bronze armour and red-plumed helmets ushered them through, without the usual formalities. The corridors within were a maze of polished stone and wooden beams, decorated with reliefs showing the deeds of kings and the favour of the gods. Tukulti had never been this deep into the palace before, and despite his fear, he couldn't help but marvel at the wealth and artistry surrounding him. They were led to a chamber overlooking the sacred pool, where Queen Puddaheppa waited with several of her advisors. The queen was a woman of perhaps 40 years, her dark hair braided with silver threads that caught the light from the oil lamps. Her eyes, when they fell upon Tukulti, seemed to see straight through to his soul. "You are the one," she said without preamble, her voice carrying the authority of one who had ruled alongside King Hattusili III for over a decade. "The young smith whose dreams are filled with voices from the underworld," Tukulti started. He had told no one about his dreams, not even Huzia. "My queen, I—" "Do not attempt to deny it," she interrupted gently. "The gods have shown me your face in my visions for 3 nights running. You stand at the centre of great events, young Tukulti. The iron you forge carries the blessing and the curse of divine attention." One of her advisors, an elderly priest named Kantuzili, stepped forward. "My queen, surely you do not mean to place the fate of the empire in the hands of a mere apprentice blacksmith?" Puddaheppa's gaze never left Tukulti's face. "The gods care nothing for mortal rank, old friend. They choose their instruments as they will." She gestured to a servant, who brought forward the blade Tukulti had forged that morning. Somehow it had been retrieved from the smithy and brought to the palace. "Tell me, young smith, what do you see when you look upon your work?" Tukulti approached the table where the blade lay. In the soft light of the palace chamber, it seemed to pulse with inner fire. But as he stared at it, his vision began to shift and blur. The blade became a key, became a bridge, became a doorway through which he could see. "Fire," he whispered. "I see fire consuming the city. I see eagles falling from the sky like black rain. I see a woman with eyes like storm clouds, and she carries betrayal in one hand and salvation in the other." The queen nodded grimly. "The gods have gifted you with sight, young Tukulti. What you describe matches what I have seen in my own visions. A great reckoning comes to Hattusa, born from oaths broken and prices unpaid." She turned to her advisors. "Send word to General Suppiluliuma. He is to halt his preparations for the Egyptian campaign immediately, and double the temple guards. We may have need of them soon." "My queen," protested another advisor. "The general will not be pleased. He has spent months preparing for this offensive. The Egyptian frontier is weak, ripe for conquest." "The Egyptian frontier can wait," Puddaheppa replied sharply. "If we ignore the warnings of the gods for the sake of mortal ambition, we risk losing not just a campaign, but the empire itself." As the advisors dispersed to carry out her orders, the queen approached Tukulti directly. "You will remain in the palace for now. Your master may return to his forge, but you have been chosen for a greater purpose. The blade you have forged is only the beginning. Before this matter is resolved, you may be called upon to craft something far more significant." "My queen, I don't understand. What oaths? What betrayal?" Puddaheppa's expression grew distant, as if she were seeing events far beyond the walls of the chamber. "Long ago, in the time of my husband's grandfather, the Hittite kings made sacred pacts with their neighbours, blood oaths sealed before the gods, promising peace and respect for boundaries. But power corrupts even the most sacred promises, and some of those oaths were broken for the sake of conquest and gold." She walked to the window overlooking the courtyard, where servants were sweeping up the stone fragments from the morning's lightning strike. "The gods have long memories, young Tukulti. They do not forget betrayal, even when mortal men choose to. And now, it seems, the price of our ancestors' broken promises has come due." As if summoned by her words, a new commotion arose from the courtyard below. Shouts of alarm and confusion echoed off the stone walls, and through the window came a sight that made even the queen step back in amazement. Rain was falling from the clear sky, but not ordinary rain. The droplets that struck the palace stones were black as pitch, staining everything they touched with dark, oily streaks. As the unnatural precipitation continued, it began to form patterns on the ground, symbols that seemed almost like writing in some ancient script. "The black rain," whispered Puddaheppa. "The final sign. Tarhuns himself weeps tears of sorrow for what is to come." She turned back to Tukulti, her face grave with the weight of prophecy. "Prepare yourself, young smith. The storm is only beginning." 3 days after the black rain, she arrived at the gates of Hattusa like a shadow-given form. The guards might have turned away any other travel-stained wanderer, but there was something about the woman that commanded attention. Perhaps the way she carried herself with the bearing of nobility despite her simple robes, or the intelligence that burned in her dark eyes like banked coals. She gave her name as Nahiri, and claimed to be a merchant from the northern lands come to trade in silver and spices. But Tukulti, watching from the palace battlements as she was escorted through the streets below, knew immediately that this was the woman from his visions, the one who carried betrayal and salvation in equal measure. "She is no merchant," he said to Cantuzili, who had been assigned to watch over him during his stay in the palace. The old priest squinted down at the figure below. "You speak with great certainty for one so young. What makes you so sure?" "The way she moves," Tukulti replied, "and the way the shadows seem to bend toward her. I've seen her face in my dreams for weeks now." Cantuzili made a sign against evil. "If that is true, then we should inform the queen immediately. No ordinary mortal appears in divine visions." But when they brought word to Queen Puduhepa, they found her already in conference with her spy master, a thin man named Muwati, whose network of informants extended throughout the known world. His expression was troubled as he delivered his report. "The woman calling herself Nahiri is indeed no merchant, my queen. My contacts in the northern cities recognize her description. She is Nahiri ur-Mitanni, daughter of the last Hurrian king of Mitanni before that kingdom fell to Assyrian conquest. She is known to be a priestess of considerable power, and some whisper that she has made pacts with spirits of the dead." Puduhepa received this news with the calm of one who had expected it. "So she comes to us in our hour of crisis, bearing the blood of our ancient enemies. This cannot be coincidence." "Shall I have her arrested?" asked Muwati. "No," the queen replied after a moment's consideration. "If the gods have sent her to us, then we must hear what she has to say. But bring her here under guard, and have the court sorcerers examine her for curses or enchantments." An hour later, Nahiri stood before the throne of Hattusa, her travel-stained cloak exchanged for simple robes provided by the palace servants. She was younger than Tukulti had expected, perhaps 25 summers, with the olive skin common to the Hurrian people, and intricate tattoos covering her arms in patterns that seemed to shift and move in the lamplight. "I greet you, Queen Puduhepa," she said, her voice carrying only a faint accent despite her foreign origins. "I come before you not as an enemy, but as one who seeks to prevent the destruction of both our peoples." "Speak then," Puduhepa commanded, "but know that lies will not be tolerated in this place. The gods have their own ways of revealing truth." Nahiri nodded and stepped forward, her gaze never wavering from the queen's face. 3 moons ago, I was performing the ritual of star reading in the ruins of my father's palace, when I was visited by a vision. I saw the great city of Hattusa consumed by fire and plague, its people scattered like leaves before the storm. But I also saw a path to redemption, a way to heal the wound that has festered between our peoples for generations. "What wound?" demanded Cantuzili. "The Hurrians were conquered by Assyria, not by us." "The Hurrians were weakened by betrayal before the Assyrians ever crossed our borders," Nahiri replied, her voice carrying the weight of long-nursed grief. "In the time of King Suppiluliuma I, the Hittites made sacred oaths with my ancestors, treaties sealed in blood and blessed by the gods, promising that neither kingdom would expand into the other's ancestral lands." She paused, and in that silence Tukulti felt the temperature in the chamber drop several degrees. When she spoke again, her words carried the chill of winter wind. But when the opportunity arose to claim the rich copper mines of the Euphrates Valley, King Suppiluliuma forgot his oaths. Hittite armies marched east under false pretexts, claiming the Hurrians had violated the treaty first. Cities were burned, temples destroyed, and the sacred places where the oaths had been sworn were defiled. Queen Puduhepa's expression remained carefully neutral, but Tukulti could see the tension in her shoulders. These are old grievances, priestess. The kings of that time are long dead. The kings are dead, Nahiri agreed, but their oaths live on. The gods do not forget, and neither do the spirits of the betrayed. She reached into her robes and withdrew a small clay tablet covered in cuneiform script. This is a copy of the original treaty, transcribed by my grandfather before he died. Every word, every clause, every sacred promise that was made and then broken. Wati stepped forward and examined the tablet briefly before nodding to the queen. The script appears authentic, my lady, and the royal seals match those in our archives. Very well, Puduhepa said. Let us assume your words are true. What does this have to do with the current omens? Why should we believe that ancient oaths have bearing on present troubles? Nahiri's eyes flashed with something that might have been satisfaction. Because the gods have shown me what comes next. General Suppiluliuma, named for his treacherous ancestor, even now prepares to march on Egypt. But his campaign will not bring glory to Hattusa. Instead, it will awaken the plague that once nearly destroyed your people, and this time there will be no escape. The chamber fell silent except for the soft hiss of burning oil in the lamps. The plague Nahiri referenced was infamous throughout the empire, a mysterious disease that had struck the Hittites decades earlier, killing thousands and bringing the kingdom to the brink of collapse. Only the personal intervention of the gods, manifested through rituals performed by the royal family, had finally ended the pestilence. You speak of things that cannot be known, Cantuzili said, but his voice lacked conviction. I speak of what the gods have revealed, Nahiri replied calmly. The same gods who sent lightning to strike your palace, who drove the sacred eagles from their nests, who wept black tears of sorrow for what is to come, the same gods who have marked this young smith with their favour. All eyes turned to Tukulti, who felt his face flush with embarrassment and fear. I am no one special, he said quickly. Just an apprentice who had some strange dreams. Strange dreams? Nahiri approached him with the fluid grace of a hunting cat. Tell me, young smith, what voice speaks to you in the darkness? What name does it whisper when you wake with hands stained by otherworldly fire? Tukulti's throat went dry. He had never told anyone about the voice, the presence that seemed to lurk at the edge of his consciousness during those haunting dreams. But somehow, this foreign priestess knew. Kumabi, he whispered, and the name seemed to echo strangely in the chamber. He calls himself Kumabi. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Cantuzili stepped back as if struck, making signs against evil with both hands. Wati's face went pale, and even Queen Puduhepa straightened in her throne with visible alarm. Kumabi, she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. The ancient god of the underworld, the one who was overthrown by Tahuns in the wars of heaven, he who holds dominion over oaths and vengeance. Nahiri nodded grimly. The god of the betrayed and the forgotten. It seems he has not abandoned his interest in mortal affairs after all. She turned back to the queen. The path to redemption remains open, but only barely. The broken oath must be renewed, the ancient compact restored. And it must be done before General Suppiluliuma returns from his fool's campaign with disaster at his heels. What would you have us do? Puduhepa asked. There is a place, Nahiri said, a sacred sanctuary where the original oaths were sworn. Yazilikaya, the sanctuary of stone where the gods themselves are carved into the living rock. There, in the presence of the divine assembly, the compact can be renewed and the price of betrayal finally paid. And what price is that? Nahiri's smile was sharp as a blade. That remains to be seen, but I suspect it will require more than words and ritual. The gods demand sacrifice commensurate with the offence, and the offence was great indeed. Before anyone could respond, a commotion arose from the corridor outside the chamber. Shouting voices approached, and a moment later the doors burst open to admit a mud-splattered messenger wearing the colours of General Suppiluliuma's advance guard. "My queen!" the man gasped, falling to one knee. "Word from the Egyptian frontier! The general requests immediate reinforcements and the services of every healer in the empire." Puduhepa leaned forward sharply. "What has happened?" "The sickness, my lady. It has struck the army like a curse from the gods. Men fall ill in the morning and are dead by nightfall. The general's forces are trapped in a border fortress, too weak to advance or retreat. He estimates that half his army is already dead or dying. The chamber fell into stunned silence. Then Nahiri spoke, her voice carrying no satisfaction, only grim inevitability. It has begun. The War Council convened at dawn in the Great Hall of the Palace, its walls adorned with the battle standards of a dozen campaigns. Queen Puddaheppa sat at the head of a long table made from Lebanese cedar, its surface scarred by the hands of generations of rulers who had faced crisis with iron determination. Around her gathered the surviving ministers of state, temple priests and military commanders, all the apparatus of empire struggling to comprehend a disaster that defied conventional understanding. Tukulti stood at the back of the hall, still uncertain why his presence had been commanded. The god-touched blade he had forged rested in a place of honour beside the queen's throne, wrapped in silk that seemed to glow with inner light. He could feel its presence like a weight on his soul, a constant reminder that his simple life as a blacksmith's apprentice was forever ended. The reports continue to arrive, announced Muwati, his network of spies working overtime to gather intelligence from the disaster unfolding on the Egyptian frontier. General Suppiluliuma's army is effectively destroyed. Of the 15,000 men who marched south 3 weeks ago, fewer than 3,000 remain capable of bearing arms. The rest are dead, dying, or have deserted in terror. An elderly commander named Hattusaziti slammed his fist on the table. This is impossible. Our armies are the finest in the world, our soldiers hardened by decades of warfare. No mere plague could destroy them so completely. This is no mere plague, said Nahiri, who had been granted a place at the council despite her foreign origins. This is divine retribution, a price of broken oaths finally come due. Your general ignored the warnings and led his men to their doom. You speak as if you orchestrated this yourself, Hurrian Witch, snarled Hattusaziti. Perhaps we should examine more closely whether you brought this curse to our lands. Before Nahiri could respond, Queen Puddaheppa raised her hand for silence. Enough. Accusations and anger will not restore our dead or heal our sick. We must focus on what can be done to protect what remains. She turned to the chief priest of Tarhuns, an ancient man named Puyemi, whose beard was white as mountain snow. What do the auguries reveal? Have you been able to determine the will of the storm god? Puyemi's expression was troubled. The signs are difficult to interpret, my queen. The sacred birds refuse to fly. The sacrificial fires burn with strange colours, and the very ground beneath the temple trembles as if something vast moves beneath it. If I were to hazard a guess, I would say that Tarhuns himself is conflicted. Conflicted about what? About whether to save us or let us face the consequences of our ancestors' actions. The old priest's voice carried the weight of decades spent in service to the gods. The divine justice we face is not entirely unearned. A heavy silence fell over the assembly. These were hard words to hear, but none could deny the evidence of their own eyes. The empire that had dominated the known world for centuries was suddenly vulnerable, its greatest strength, its army, crippled by forces beyond mortal understanding. It was then that a new voice entered the discussion, one that made every head turn in surprise and anger. From the doorway came General Suppiluliuma himself, supported by 2 of his surviving officers. The great commander looked like a ghost of his former self, his face gaunt with fever, his once proud bearing bent with exhaustion and defeat. "My queen," he rasped, his voice barely recognisable. "I have failed you. I have failed the Empire, and I have learned truths that I wish I could forget." Queen Puddaheppa rose from her throne, genuine concern overriding protocol. "General, you should not have made this journey in your condition. You need rest and healing." "There is no healing for what I have seen," Suppiluliuma replied, stumbling toward the table. "The sickness that struck my army, it was not natural. It came from the very ground beneath our feet, rising like vapours from some infernal pit. And with it came visions, terrible visions of the past." He collapsed into a chair, his officers hovering anxiously nearby. "I saw them, my queen. I saw the Hurrian cities my ancestor destroyed. I watched Hittite soldiers burn their temples and defile their sacred places. I felt the weight of their curses as if they were chains binding my soul. Nahiri leaned forward, her dark eyes intense. The land remembers, General. Every stone that was cast down, every oath that was broken, every innocent life that was taken, it all leaves its mark on the world. And now those marks have become wounds that fester and poison everything they touch. What would you have us do? Demanded Hattusaziti. The past cannot be changed. The dead cannot be brought back to life. No, Nahiri agreed, but the living can choose to break the cycle of vengeance and betrayal. The gods offer redemption, but only to those willing to pay its price. General Supelu Liuma raised his fever-bright eyes to stare at the Hurrian priestess. What price? What could possibly balance the scales after so much blood and suffering? That is not for me to say, Nahiri replied. The gods will make their demands known when the time comes. But first, the ancient compact must be renewed at the place where it was first sworn. Yazulakaya holds the key to salvation, if we are brave enough to turn that key. Queen Puddaheppa had been listening to this exchange with growing resolve. Now she stood and addressed the assembly with the authority that had helped her rule an empire for over a decade. We will go to Yazulakaya, she declared. A small party, myself, the priestess Nahiri, young Tukulti, and a minimal escort. The sanctuary is only a day's ride from the capital, and if there is hope to be found there, we must seek it immediately. My queen, protested Kantuzili, the risks are too great. If something should happen to you, if something happens to me, then the Empire will face the same fate whether I am here or there, Puddaheppa interrupted. But if there is a chance, however small, to lift the curse that has fallen upon us, then that chance must be taken. She turned to Tukulti, who had remained silent throughout the debate. Young Smith, are you willing to see this through to its end? The god-touched blade you forged may be needed before our task is complete. Tukulti felt the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders like a mantle of iron. I will go where you command, my queen, but I fear I am not worthy of such trust. Worthiness is not ours to judge, replied Puddaheppa. We are all instruments in the hands of the gods. Our task is to serve their will as faithfully as we can, regardless of our doubts or fears. As the council dispersed to make preparations for the journey, Nahiri approached Tukulti with an expression of concern. There is something you should know before we depart, she said in a low voice. The voices you hear in your dreams, Kamabi's whispers, they will grow stronger as we approach the sacred place. He will try to tempt you with offers of power, with promises of revenge against those who have wronged you. I have been wronged by no one, Tukulti replied, confused. Have you not? Nahiri's smile was sad. You are lowborn in a world ruled by nobles, poor in a city filled with wealth, powerless in an empire built on domination. Kamabi feeds on such resentments, nurtures them until they become consuming flames of hatred. He will offer you the chance to rise above your station, to take by force what has been denied you by birth. And if he does, then you must remember that some prices are too high to pay no matter what they purchase. Nahiri placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. The gods chose you for this task, young Tukulti. Trust in that choice, even when the path becomes dark. As night fell over Hattusa, Tukulti lay on his simple cot in the palace servants' quarters and tried to quiet his racing thoughts. Tomorrow would bring challenges he could barely imagine, a journey into the heart of divine mystery that might determine the fate of empires. But when sleep finally claimed him, his dreams were filled not with the whispers of Kumabi, but with images of fire and iron, of ancient oaths carved in stone, and of a darkness that pressed against the walls of the world like a tide seeking to break through and drown everything in shadow. The storm was coming, and he would stand at its centre whether he wished it or not. The sacred sanctuary of Yazulakaya lay in a natural gorge carved from the living rock by millennia of wind and water. As Queen Puddaheppa's small party approached through the morning mist, the ancient carvings seemed to emerge from the stone itself, dozens of divine figures marching in eternal procession along the walls of the ravine. Tukulti had never seen anything like it. The gods of the Hittite pantheon were rendered in exquisite detail, each figure taller than a man and carved with such skill that they seemed almost to breathe. At the head of the divine procession strode Tahuns himself, the storm god, his hand raised to strike with divine lightning. Behind him came Hebat, his consort, and then the entire assembly of heaven, gods of war and peace, of harvest and hunt, of sun and moon and stars. "It is magnificent," breathed one of their guards, a young soldier named Ziti who had never ventured so far from the capital. "It is more than magnificent," Queen Puduhepa replied, her voice hushed with reverence. "It is the threshold between the mortal world and the realm of the gods. Here, the veil between earth and heaven grows thin." Nahiri had been silent during the ride from Hattusa, but now she spoke with the authority of one who had spent years studying the ancient mysteries. The carvings are more than mere decoration. They are a map of divine relationships, a guide to the proper conduct of gods and mortals alike. And there, she pointed to a section of the wall where the stone had been darkened by age and weather. "There is where the original compact was sworn." Tukulti followed her gesture and saw a space where several figures had been carved deep into the rock. Unlike the other divine images, these showed mortals and gods standing together, their hands joined in what could only be an oath-taking ceremony. The details were worn by centuries of weather, but he could still make out the essential elements: a Hittite king, a Hurrian ruler, and between them a figure that radiated divine authority. "Kumarbi," he said, and the name seemed to echo strangely in the enclosed space of the gorge. "Yes," Nahiri confirmed, "the ancient god of oaths and justice, witness to the compact that bound our peoples in peace, until your ancestors decided that conquest was more profitable than honour." Queen Puduhepa approached the weathered carving and placed her hand against the stone. "If we are to renew this oath, we must understand exactly what it entailed. Can you read the inscriptions?" Nahiri studied the worn, cuneiform text that surrounded the carved figures. Most of it is too damaged to decipher clearly, but the essential elements remain. The Hittites and Hurrians swore before the gods to respect each other's territorial boundaries, to come to each other's aid in times of crisis, and to share the profits of trade between their lands. In return, the gods promised prosperity and protection to both peoples. And when the oath was broken, the gods promised that divine justice would eventually be served no matter how long it took. Nahiri's voice carried the weight of prophecy. That justice has now arrived. As if summoned by her words, a low rumble began to emanate from deep within the earth. The carved gods seemed to shimmer in the morning light, and Tukulti felt a familiar presence pressing against the edges of his consciousness. "Welcome, young smith," came the voice of Kumarbi, clearer now than it had ever been in dreams. "You stand at the crossroads of destiny. Will you serve justice, or will you cling to the comfortable lies of mortal pride?" Tukulti stumbled backward, his hand instinctively reaching for the god-touched blade at his side. "He's here," he gasped. "Kumarbi is here." The rumbling grew stronger, and several of the guards looked around nervously as loose stones began to fall from the ravine walls. But Queen Puduhepa stood firm, her face set with royal determination. "If the god of justice wishes to speak with us, then let him speak," she declared. "We have come here seeking truth and redemption. We will not flee from divine judgment." The air in the gorge seemed to thicken, becoming almost solid with supernatural presence. When Kumarbi's voice came again, it was no longer confined to Tukulti's mind, but echoed from the very stones themselves. "You speak bravely, Queen of the Hittites, but do you understand the full weight of what your people have done? Do you comprehend the price that justice demands?" "I understand that our ancestors broke sacred oaths," Puduhepa replied, her voice steady despite the awesome nature of the conversation. "I understand that innocent people have suffered because of that betrayal. And I understand that the current plague threatening our empire is divine punishment for past sins. Understanding is the first step toward wisdom," Kumarbi acknowledged. "But understanding alone is not enough. The scales of justice must be balanced, and that balance requires sacrifice." "What sacrifice?" demanded Nahiri, stepping forward to stand beside the queen. "My people have already paid in blood and suffering. How much more must be given before the debt is considered paid?" "The debt is not yours alone, daughter of Mitanni. The Hittites too must pay their portion. but the nature of that payment, that will be determined by choices yet to be made. The god's presence seemed to focus on Tukulti, who felt himself being examined by an intelligence vast and terrible, beyond mortal comprehension. You, young smith, will be the instrument of justice. The blade you have forged is only the beginning. Before this matter is resolved, you will be called upon to create something far greater and far more dangerous. What must I create? Tukulti asked, his voice barely a whisper. A new compact, a binding that will unite the broken pieces of the old oath and forge them into something stronger than either kingdom could achieve alone. But beware, the forces you will unleash could as easily destroy as heal. The choice between creation and destruction will be yours to make. The supernatural presence began to fade, but Kumabi's final words rang with prophetic certainty. The plague that consumes your armies even now is only the beginning. Greater trials await, and they will test not just your courage, but your willingness to sacrifice everything you hold dear for the sake of justice. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the wind seemed to have stilled, as if the entire world held its breath waiting for what would come next. Then, gradually, the oppressive weight of divine presence began to lift, and the normal sounds of the living world returned. Bird calls, rustling leaves, the distant murmur of water flowing over stone. Queen Pudahepa was the first to speak. We have our answer then. The god demands a new compact, forged by young Tukulti's hand. But what form should this compact take? Before anyone could answer, the sound of galloping horses echoed from the gorge entrance. A messenger in the colours of the palace guard came racing toward them, his mount lathered with sweat and foam. He leaped from his saddle before the horse had fully stopped and fell to one knee before the queen. "My lady," he gasped. "Terrible news from the capital. General Suppiluliuma's surviving soldiers have returned, and they have brought the plague with them. The city is in chaos. People flee in all directions, and the temple priests say the gods have abandoned us entirely." Puduhepa's face went pale, but her voice remained steady. "How many are affected?" "Hundreds already, my queen, and more falling ill by the hour. The sickness spreads faster than wildfire, and those who contract it rarely survive the first day. The physicians are helpless. Their remedies have no effect." Nahiri stepped forward, her expression grim. "The curse grows stronger. Soon it will consume not just Hattusa, but spread throughout the empire and beyond. Unless we act quickly, this plague will become a disaster that echoes through the ages." "Then we must return immediately," declared the queen. "If my people are dying, my place is with them." "No," Tukulti said suddenly, surprising everyone, including himself. "If we return now, we'll only carry the plague's influence with us. The answer lies here, in this sacred place. Kumabi said I must forge a new compact. Perhaps that's what will stop the curse." Nahiri nodded slowly. "The young smith speaks wisdom. The sanctuary of Yazilakaya is protected by ancient power. Here, we might find a way to create something that can heal the wound between our peoples and lift the curse that threatens both." Queen Puduhepa looked torn between her duty to her subjects and the demands of divine justice. Finally she made her decision. "We will remain, but we must work quickly. Send word back to the capital that they should isolate the sick and burn offerings to Tarhuns. Tell them that their queen seeks a cure in the sacred places and that hope remains." The messenger rode off into the gathering dusk, leaving the small party alone with the carved gods and the weight of destiny pressing down upon them like a mountain of stone. Night fell over Yasilakaya like a shroud, but instead of bringing darkness, it seemed to awaken something within the ancient stones. The carved gods appeared to glow with inner light, their eyes following the movements of the mortals who had dared to seek divine judgment in their sacred domain. Tukulti sat before a makeshift forge that the guards had constructed, using stones from the gorge and charcoal brought from their supplies. The fire burned with unnatural colours, blue and green flames that cast strange shadows on the surrounding walls. In his hands he held the god-touch blade he had forged in Hattusa, studying its perfect edge in the flickering light. "It's not enough," he said finally. "This blade was made for cutting, for taking apart. But what we need is something that binds, something that brings together what has been broken. Queen Puddaheppa sat nearby, her royal robes exchanged for simple travelling clothes that made her look more like a wise woman than an empress. "What do you propose?" "A chain," Tukulti replied, the idea forming even as he spoke. "Not made of iron or bronze, but of the same material as this blade. God-touched metal that can bind oaths as surely as it can cut flesh. But I'll need more than just my own skill to forge such a thing." Nahiri emerged from her meditation beside the oath carving, her eyes bright with otherworldly knowledge. The ritual of binding requires 3 elements: the metal itself, the blood of those who swear the oath, and the blessing of the gods who witness it. 2 of these we can provide ourselves, but the third will come when it is needed," said a new voice, and they all turned to see General Suppiluliuma approaching through the darkness. The great commander looked even more haggard than before, his fever-bright eyes reflecting the strange colours of the forge fire. "General," Queen Puddaheppa rose in alarm, "you should not have followed us here. Your condition—" "My condition is dying," Suppiluliuma interrupted with bitter honesty. "The plague has its claws in me, and I have perhaps hours rather than days remaining. But before I face the judgment of the gods, I would try to balance the scales of justice for the crimes of my bloodline." He reached into his travel pack and withdrew something that made them all gasp in recognition. An ancient bronze tablet covered in cuneiform script, its surface green with age, but its writing still clearly visible. "The original treaty," he said, placing it carefully beside Tukulti's forge. "I retrieved it from the palace archives before following you here. It contains the exact wording of the oath that was sworn and broken, the precise terms that must be renewed." Nahiri took the tablet with reverent hands and began to read by the light of the mystical flames. Her voice carried the weight of ancient ceremony as she translated the archaic script. "By the power of Tarhuns the Stormlord, by the wisdom of Kumarbi the Judge, by the authority of all the gods who witnessed this compact, we bind ourselves and our descendants in sacred oath. Let the Hittites and Hurrians be as one people in 2 lands, sharing prosperity in times of plenty and standing together in times of trial. Let the boundaries between us be lines of friendship rather than walls of enmity. And let the iron of our weapons be turned to the tools of peace, that both peoples might flourish under the blessing of heaven." She looked up from the tablet, tears streaming down her face. Such beautiful words, such noble intentions. How could they have been forgotten so easily? "Because men are weak," General Suppiluliuma replied, his voice thick with self-recrimination. "Because the temptation of power and wealth proved stronger than the bonds of honour. Because we convinced ourselves that conquest was more important than conscience." Tukulti had been listening to this exchange while working at his forge, heating the god-touched blade until it glowed like a star fallen to earth. Now he began to fold and reshape the metal, not into a weapon, but into links of an impossibly delicate chain. Each link was perfect, seamlessly joined to its neighbours, creating a length of binding that seemed to capture and reflect the light of the otherworldly flames. "It is beautiful," whispered Queen Puddaheppa as she watched the chain take shape under Tukulti's skilled hands. "But will it be strong enough to bind the forces we are dealing with?" "Physical strength is not what matters here," Nahiri replied, watching the young smith work with growing amazement. "What he creates is a vessel for divine power, a conduit through which the gods can work their will in the mortal world. Its true strength will come from the sincerity of the oath sworn upon it." As if summoned by her words, the presence of Kumarbi began to manifest once again in the sacred gorge. But this time, the ancient god was not alone. Other divine presences gathered in the shadows, Tarhuns with his storm-crowned majesty, Hebat with her nurturing wisdom, and figures that belonged to the Hurrian pantheon as well as the Hittite. "The time has come," Kumarbi's voice resonated from the stones themselves. "The compact must be renewed, the broken oath reforged. But know this, what you create here tonight will echo through the ages. The choices you make will determine not just the fate of your peoples, but the shape of the world that comes after." General Suppiluliuma stepped forward, his dying body somehow finding new strength in the presence of the divine assembly. "I offer myself as surety for the oaths of my bloodline," he declared. "Let the guilt of my ancestors' betrayal be paid with my life, that the innocent might be spared." But Kumarbi's response was not what any of them expected. "Your death would be meaningless, General. Justice is not served by empty gestures or self-indulgent sacrifice. The gods require something far more difficult. They require you to live, and to spend what time remains to you working to heal the wounds your family has caused." The divine presence shifted to encompass Queen Puddaheppa, and you, Queen of the Hittites, must make a choice that will define your legacy. Will you cling to the territorial ambitions that have brought your empire to the brink of destruction, or will you choose a different path, one that leads to lasting peace but requires the surrender of the worldly power? Finally, the god's attention fell upon Nahiri. "Daughter of betrayed Mitanni, you carry the pain of your people's suffering, but also the key to their redemption. Will you choose vengeance or reconciliation? The choice is yours, but choose wisely, for on your decision hangs the fate of both kingdoms." The chain into Kulti's hands was nearly complete now, its links glowing with inner fire that seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. As he worked to join the final links, he felt the weight of destiny settling upon his shoulders like a mantle of stars. "The compact is ready," he announced, holding up the completed chain. It was perhaps 3 feet in length, light as silk but radiating power that made the air around it shimmer like heat waves. But what terms should govern the new oath? It was Nahiri who answered, her voice carrying the authority of one who spoke for the dead as well as the living. Not the old terms of separation, but new ones of unity. Let the survivors of both peoples join together, not as conquerors and conquered, but as equals seeking to build something better than what came before. Queen Puddaheppa nodded slowly. The Hittite Empire has reached the end of its time. Perhaps what rises from its ashes can be something worthier, a confederation of peoples bound not by force, but by mutual benefit and shared purpose. General Suppiluliuma, his fever-bright eyes fixed on the god-touch chain, made his own vow. "I will spend my remaining days working to undo the damage my bloodline has caused. Let the wealth that was stolen be returned. Let the temples that were destroyed be rebuilt. Let the wrongs of the past be made right, insofar as mortal effort can achieve." The divine assembly seemed to approve of these words, for the oppressive weight of supernatural judgment began to lift slightly. But Kumarbi was not finished. The new compact must be sealed in blood and blessed with sacrifice. Are you prepared to pay the price that justice demands? Without hesitation, each of the 4 mortals stepped forward and allowed their blood to fall upon the glowing chain. As the droplets touched the god-touched metal, they flared with brilliant light, and words began to appear along the length of the chain. The terms of the new compact written in script that seemed to shift between Hittite cuneiform and Hurrian hieroglyphs. But the final sacrifice was yet to come, and it was one that none of them had anticipated. The realization came to Queen Puddaheppa like a thunderbolt from the clear sky. Sudden, devastating, and absolutely certain. As she stood in the sacred gorge with the god-touched chain burning into Kulti's hands and the assembled deities of 2 civilizations watching in silence, she understood what the final sacrifice must be. "The plague will not be lifted by words alone," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "It requires the life force of one who carries the responsibility for both people's fate, one who can serve as a bridge between the living and the dead, between the mortal world and the realm of the gods." Nahiri's eyes widened with understanding and horror. "No, my queen. There must be another way. The gods cannot demand such a price." "The gods demand what justice requires," Puddaheppa replied with sad certainty. "I have ruled the Hittite Empire for more than a decade. I have prospered from the wealth built on broken oaths and conquered lands. If the curse is to be lifted, if the new compact is to have the power to heal the wounds between our peoples, then it must be sealed with the life of one who bears responsibility for the crimes of the past." General Suppiluliuma tried to protest from his position beside the ancient oath carving. "Take my life instead. I am dying already, and my bloodline bears the greater guilt." But Queen Puddaheppa shook her head. "Your task is to live, General, and to spend your remaining time making what amends you can. My task is to ensure that the compact has the power to succeed where all previous agreements have failed." The divine presences in the gorge seemed to hold their breath as the Queen approached Tukulti and the glowing chain. "Young smith, you have been chosen by the gods to forge instruments of justice. Will you complete the work that has been set before you?" Tukulti's hand shook as he held the chain, feeling the weight of destiny and the terrible price it demanded. "My queen, I will not be the instrument of your death. There must be another way." "There is no other way," Puddaheppa said gently. "The plague that consumes our people grows stronger with each passing hour. Even now it spreads beyond the borders of our empire, threatening to become a catastrophe that echoes through the ages. Only a willing sacrifice, freely given, can provide the power needed to break the curse." She placed her hands over Tukulti's, her touch somehow making the chain's radiance burn even brighter. "But death is not the end of service, young smith. What I do here tonight will bind my spirit to the compact itself, making me its eternal guardian. As long as the oath endures, so will my vigilance over its terms." The voice of Kumabi resonated from the carved stones around them. "The Queen speaks truth. Such is the price of redemption, not merely the payment of blood, but the transformation of life into something greater. Are you prepared to pay this price, daughter of Hattusa?" "I am," Puddaheppa replied without hesitation. "But first the compact must be properly witnessed and its terms clearly stated." She turned to address the assembled divine presences directly, her voice carrying the authority of one who had negotiated with gods and kings alike. "Hear me, powers of heaven and earth. Let this new compact replace all previous oaths between the Hittite and Hurrian peoples. Let the survivors of both civilizations join together as equals, sharing resources and responsibilities, protecting each other from external threats and internal discord." Nahiri stepped forward to stand beside the Queen. "Let the ancient boundaries be dissolved, and new ones drawn not on maps, but in the hearts of those who choose to be bound by this compact. Let the wealth of both lands be used for the benefit of all who swear allegiance to this oath." General Suppiluliuma added his voice from beside the oath carving. "Let the wrongs of the past be acknowledged and, where possible, redressed. Let the temples that were destroyed be rebuilt, the treasures that were stolen be returned, and the descendants of the wronged be given honour in the new order." Finally Tukulti spoke, his voice growing stronger as he felt the divine purpose flowing through him. "Let this chain serve as the physical symbol of the compact, binding not through force, but through willing consent. Let those who would join the new confederation come forward freely, and let those who choose to remain apart be allowed to do so without persecution." The gods' approval was manifest in the very air around them, which began to shimmer with power that made the mortal realm seem thin and insubstantial. But it was Kumabi who spoke the final terms. "Let this compact be sealed with sacrifice freely given, and let its power endure so long as justice and mercy are remembered in the hearts of mortals. Let the plague be lifted from the guilty and innocent alike, and let the new order rise from the ashes of the old." Queen Puddaheppa took the glowing chain from Tukulti's hands and wrapped it around her own wrists, binding herself to the compact she had helped create. As the god-touched metal touched her skin, she felt a transformation beginning, not painful but profound beyond words. "Remember me not as a queen who died," she said, her voice already beginning to take on an otherworldly quality, "but as one who chose to become something greater than human ambition. Guide the new confederation with wisdom and justice, and know that I will be watching over you always." The transformation was swift and terrible and beautiful. Queen Puddaheppa's mortal form dissolved into pure light that flowed into the chain itself, making it burn with radiance that illuminated the entire gorge. The carved gods on the walls seemed to bow their heads in respect as the divine assembly witnessed the birth of a new compact sealed with the ultimate sacrifice. But even as the Queen's mortal life ended, Her voice continued to echo from the god-touched chain. "The plague is broken. The curse is lifted. Let the work of healing begin." The news of Queen Puduhepa's sacrifice spread through the dying empire like wildfire in reverse. Wherever the story was told, the plague began to recede. Soldiers who had been at death's door found strength returning to their limbs. Citizens who had fled in terror began to return to their homes. The black rain stopped falling, and the sacred eagles returned to nest in the palace groves. But the empire that emerged from the crisis was not the same one that had entered it. The old order of conquest and domination was finished, its foundations cracked beyond repair by the weight of divine judgment. In its place, something new began to take shape, a confederation guided by the principles embodied in the god-touched chain that Tukulti now carried as its first guardian. General Supiluluma, his life extended by divine intervention, but forever changed by his encounter with justice, spent his remaining years travelling throughout the former empire. He returned stolen treasures to their rightful owners, helped rebuild destroyed temples, and worked tirelessly to make what amends he could for the crimes of his bloodline. When death finally claimed him 3 years later, it was said that he died with a smile on his lips, having found peace at last. Nahiri became the first high priestess of the new confederation, charged with maintaining the spiritual traditions of both peoples and ensuring that the lessons of the past were not forgotten. Under her guidance, schools were established where Hittite and Hurrian children learned together, sharing languages and customs and creating bonds that would endure for generations. But it was Tukulti whose transformation was perhaps the most remarkable of all. The simple blacksmith's apprentice became the guardian of the compact, keeper of the god-touched chain that served as both symbol and substance of the new order. He never married, dedicating his life entirely to the service of justice and the protection of the Confederation's founding principles. In the years that followed, as the great powers of the ancient world crumbled and new civilizations rose to take their place, the Confederation endured. It remained small compared to the mighty empires that surrounded it, but it prospered through trade and diplomacy rather than conquest. Its people were known throughout the ancient world for their skill in metalworking, their wisdom in governance, and their unwavering commitment to the oaths that bound them together. The god-touched chain was kept in a special temple built at Jazilakaya, where pilgrims from across the known world came to witness the carved gods and learn the story of the compact that had transformed curse into blessing. On certain nights, when the moon was dark and the air was still, visitors claimed they could hear Queen Puduhepa's voice whispering guidance to those who sought justice with sincere hearts. Tukulti lived to a great age, his hair white as mountain snow, but his eyes still bright with the fire of divine purpose. On his deathbed, surrounded by the leaders of the Confederation he had helped to create, he spoke his final words: "The chain endures. The compact endures." Let those who come after us remember that true strength lies not in the power to conquer, but in the wisdom to unite what has been divided. The gods are watching, and they remember both justice and mercy. With his death, the god-touched chain was entrusted to a new guardian, as it would be to dozens more over the centuries that followed. Each one swore the same oath that Tukulti had sworn, promising to protect the compact's principles even unto death. The Hittite Empire, as history records it, fell around 1180 BCE, swept away by the mysterious sea peoples and the collapse of the Bronze Age world. The great capital of Hattusa was abandoned, its palaces and temples left to crumble into ruins that would not be rediscovered for thousands of years. But in the mountains of Anatolia, hidden valleys sheltered communities that claimed descent from both Hittites and Hurrians, people who spoke of ancient compacts and sacred chains, of a queen who became more than mortal, and a blacksmith who forged justice from divine fire. To the outside world, they were merely isolated villagers clinging to half-remembered legends, but among themselves they maintained traditions that stretched back to the very foundations of civilization. They were the keepers of forgotten knowledge, the guardians of oaths that the great powers of the world had chosen to ignore. When Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire, when Rome rose to dominate the Mediterranean, when new religions swept away the old gods, still they endured. Small, hidden, faithful to principles that most of the world had forgotten. The God-touched chain itself vanished from historical record, though stories persisted of a sacred relic that could bind oaths with divine authority. Some claimed it was buried with the last guardian in a secret tomb beneath Yazilakaya. Others insisted it had been hidden away, waiting for a time when the world would once again need the kind of justice it represented. Archaeological evidence for these claims remains elusive. The sanctuary of Yazilakaya still stands, its carved gods weathered by millennia but still magnificent in their eternal procession. Scholars study the inscriptions and marvel at the artistry, but few suspect that the ancient stones once witnessed events that changed the course of history itself. Perhaps that is as it should be. Some truths are too profound for academic study, too sacred for scholarly dissection. They live instead in the whispered stories passed from generation to generation, in the dreams of those who long for justice, in the hearts of all who believe that the broken can be made whole again. And sometimes, on certain nights when the moon is dark and the air is still, visitors to Yazilakaya claim they can hear voices speaking from the ancient stones. A queen who chose to become eternal, a blacksmith who forged hope from despair, a priestess who taught that enemies could become friends, and a general who learned that redemption was possible even for the gravest sins. The Storm King's oath endures, they say, waiting for a new age that will have need of its power. The chain may be hidden, the Confederation may be forgotten by the world's historians, but the principles they embodied remain as relevant today as they were 3,000 years ago. Justice and mercy, unity from division, the courage to sacrifice for something greater than oneself, the wisdom to choose peace over conquest, cooperation over domination. These are the whispered truths that echo down through the ages, carried in the hearts of all who believe that a better world is possible, if only we have the courage to forge it. The gods are watching still, and they remember both our failures and our aspirations. The choice of what we build from the ashes of the old world remains ours to make. May we choose wisely.